This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Bill Fick Ford, the WCRA, and Resistol. Guys, another year has ticked by, challenging year, but there was somebody you could rely on if you needed a new Super Duty pickup, and that was Bill Fick Ford. Once again, the #1 Super Duty dealer in the entire country. You guys have seen what's going on in the car business, in the truck business. You're seeing trucks being sold for thousands above MSRP. Well, if you go to Bill Fick Ford, it doesn't matter where you are at in the continental U.S. He will take care of you. He will stand by the product, and he will not take advantage of you. Guys, Bill Fick Ford is the only place you can go in 2022 for a no-bull discount. Bill Fick Ford. Guys, it's that time again. Rodeo Corpus Christi will be one of the largest paying rodeos of the entire year. That's $550,000 with more than $50,000 promised per discipline, with no entry fees. Rodeo Corpus Christi will be the first stop of the WCRA's Triple Crown of Rodeo. The only way to qualify for Rodeo Corpus Christi is by nominating your rides or runs with the WCRA. You can win $1 million by nominating your rides and runs and earning points with the WCRA. Through the Triple Crown of Rodeo, the WCRA will award $1 million in cash prizes to any one athlete or collection of athletes who place first at any 3 consecutive WCRA major rodeos. The WCRA has awarded more than $10.8 million to athletes in a little more than 2 years. Come on, guys. To learn more, just visit WCRArodeo.com and learn how you can earn a spot at Rodeo Corpus Christi and possibly be Rodeo's next millionaire. Boom.
What sets Resistol apart is the legacy of the Cowboys who wear the brand. These traditions are passed down from fathers to sons, from heroes to future champions. Since 1927, Resistol has been handcrafting the finest American-made cowboy hats. Generation after generation, we live it every day.
This is The Gauge with host Chance Conradu.
Are you freaking serious? It's Conrado. This is The Gauge at 6 a.m., and I am Chance Conrado. On this episode of the podcast, we're all tired, but we're here to speak to 2 legends in their own right, Shawn Davis and his son, Zane Davis. Could just drop it right there. Shawn Davis has been instrumental in getting rodeo to where it is today, and of course, Zane Davis is one of the best horse trainers alive, and a true scholar, and just a pure horseman, and he is a $2 million rider. I'm just going to drop it right there. We didn't have the time that we wanted to because he has to show and had to be back to the fairgrounds at 8 a.m. But anyway, 1 hour, so much value. Check it out. Well, so I kind of thought that the best way to start this is we would start with dad, transition to son, and we'll have to be pretty timely, I suppose, just based on usually these go a little longer than an hour. But Shawn, I think the best way for us to make this impactful and valuable, which is what we really try to do on this show, is to start with you and kind of who you are and maybe your early journey, because, you know, flattery aside, I mean, you're an absolute legend in the rodeo world. Everybody knows that. Everybody who partakes in the world of rodeo owes you, some gratitude for some of the big decisions you made. But I think the best thing we could do is go back to your early life and then work our way to that. And then we'll bump over to your son.
Yeah, I'm 80 years old. There's a lot there.
Shawn, tell me kind of what it was that put you on the path where you wanted to ride bucking horses, and what the whole culture of rodeo was like back in the early 60s, mid-60s, and going into the 70s.
Well, if you want to start to begin with, I grew up on a ranch, but my grandparents I stayed with my grandparents a lot, and for some reason, the first thing I can never remember, I wanted to be a cowboy. And they'd put me on goats and calves when I was, 2-3 years old. And then I started breaking ponies before I was in school. And the cowboys were always my heroes, and that's all I ever had in mind, was to be a cowboy.
And for whatever reason, you were attracted to the bucking horse side of things. I mean, saddle bronc horses in specific.
Well, I always wanted Jim Shoulders was my hero at that time, and I always wanted to be a bareback rider and a bull rider. But in Montana at that time, you had a hard time finding any bulls at the rodeos. But I had a neighbor that's dad was a bronc rider and had done quite well, and my parents weren't very enthused about me being involved with rodeo at all. And I'd get off the school bus all the time and ride calves and cows after school, but I'd have to walk home about a half a mile through the fields, and I'd always fall in the creek. So my mother I thought she couldn't tell that I had been riding, but I'd get off each night and I'd ride one with a bull rope, one with a bareback rigging, and one with a saddle. An A-fork saddle of all things. and then I had to get into 4-H because that's the only rodeos they had at that time. And I can remember my mother having to sign a release saying that I'd be sure and have a project and go to the fair, or they weren't going to let me in the club. But that was our first introduction to rodeo. And then I come up through high school, at college, and professional rodeo.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you got, I mean, because I'm just thinking about what Montana was probably like in those times. I mean, there probably wasn't a whole lot of people. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people there now unless you get into Bozeman and things like that. But, I mean, I couldn't imagine what it would be like, because we live in Texas and there's a rodeo every block every day. But in Montana in the 60s, I imagine you had to jump around like crazy just to find one.
Well, see, that was in the 50s when I was riding in high school, and well, there wasn't a junior rodeo, but and there was the mines there at Butte, Montana, and a lot of the cowboys would come there that were professional cowboys and work in the mines, and then the Reynoldses were the heroes and the stars of Montana. I know they're forgotten now, but they were great cowboys. And John Reynolds, he had the ability of Ty Murray. He just had some problems. He liked to spend more time in the bar than he did rodeoing, but he was outstanding. And I can remember standing on the street corner because they'd go to the bars. They'd always be in the bar and they'd practice over there. And this is in the wintertime. The ground would be frozen. You know, we'd ride bucking horses on the arenas weren't worked. You just ride them on the frozen ground. And I'd stand by the bar just so I could hope he'd come out so I'd get a chance to talk to him. And then when I got about 13, I'd go over there and they'd put me on a bucking horse, especially then they thought you had to break your rigging in. I don't know how many riggings I got to break in with them guys, but they'd give me a rigging, and that was kind of the initiation that initial start of riding bucking horses.
Yeah, and what was that point where you were, I mean, riding bucking horses that you realized, like, wow, I think I might have something that I can take this full circle and make it my life's pursuit?
It was kind of surprising. I never did think I was good enough. And the first rodeo we ever went to, because they didn't have telephones then, and the ones they did have was, so many rings, and that was your ring, and it was a party line. So my parents weren't very much for me going to any rodeos, but there was a rodeo about 200 miles away there at Darby, Montana. It was a junior rodeo. Basically, it was steer riding, and then after the rodeo they had a bareback riding, a jackpot bareback riding, which the same guys that I was telling you about was all competing in. And me and two friends caught a bus over there. I went and stayed with my friend 15 miles away, which was a long way, and then we caught a bus out of Boulder instead of Whitehall and went to the rodeo. And after I think I won third in the steer riding, and my Jack Doss, my friend, he won it. And we got in a conversation with, thought I'd had enough practice. We pooled our money and put me in the bareback riding. And anyhow, I ended up winning second in the bareback riding, and I think I won $60 or $70, which was a lot of money at that time.
Right.
And then how do you spend it when you're? I think I was 13 years old. Well, when we come home, I can't let my parents know that I've won any money because they wonder where the heck I won it. And that was the first experience. But at that time, I didn't realize I had the kind of ability that with no more practice than that I had, but I did win second, the first bareback horse I ever got on, and then the high school rodeo I got on kind of in a dare, and I placed on the first saddle bronc I was ever on, and so I started realizing then that I would go to some professional rodeos, but I was still in my teens, and I was placing. And then I won the amateur bronc riding at Calgary and the amateur bronc ride at Cheyenne. And at that time, actually, there was a story there. Bill Innerman, who was the kind of the John Wayne of the rodeo business,
absolutely.
I was pulled into Cheyenne, and he the car pulled up and come to a sliding stop, and he jumped out and he said, "Hey, you little SOB," he said, "you've been working these rodeos on your permit, and you've won 20-some hundred on your permit already this month, and one of the rodeos that you won in didn't take permits." And he said, "You signed this and joined the organization." Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't old enough to sign myself, so I had to send it home to my mother, and I joined the association. I said, if I win the amateur bronc riding here at Cheyenne, I'll join, and I did. So I sent the application home to my mother, and that I joined in the fall of 1962.
And then the rest is kind of off to the races.
Well, it was kind of the first thing, because I didn't know there was bad horses and good horses. I just thought you could ride everything good. And the first two horses I got on, because I didn't hardly ever get thrown off at that time, the first two horses I got on bucked me off at Great Falls, Montana, and I thought, boy, this is the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life. But to kind of shorten the story up, in the next 2 weeks I won 2,900, which would be like winning 29 or 30,000 now.
Right.
And so then I knew that I had made a good decision.
Right. Yeah, and so you went through that whole process and kind of, what was the first year that you kind of made the road to Oklahoma City, what would now be Vegas? But for everybody who doesn't realize, if they're a little younger than me, well, the NFR used to be in Oklahoma City. Everybody knows that. And, of course, we'll get to that part, because you are probably the key figure that we all have to thank for our 10 days in Vegas that we get to spend. Well, I don't know if we should thank you for the money we spend going down there, but
right. To tell the story there, that was before Oklahoma City when I went. I went to Los Angeles, was the first one. It was down Watts area, mm-hmm. And of course they hadn't, it had been in Dallas and been fairly successful, and then the NFR moved to California, and it was 1963 was the first time I attended. And it was, it had the same format. They had great ideas. I thought John Van Concride, who I patterned the national finals off of his thinking later, that basically the thoughts on the national finals rodeo was that it was the best against the best, and whoever was in the arena at that time, that was their moment of glory, whether it was 2 seconds or 2 minutes, that was, and all attention focused on it. I always kept that in mind. But the rodeo at Los Angeles was not very successful. And then as far as what we'd hoped to get out of it, but for some reason I was always I thought that the National Finals Rodeo was the key to the success of the rodeo business. And then when they moved it to Oklahoma City in 65 was the first year that it went to Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma City did a great job. They built it up, and they had everybody selling tickets, and they're the ones that really developed the rodeo.
Let me ask you a question. Have either of you guys been to Los Angeles, like, in the last 20 years?
I have.
Could you imagine having a rodeo in Los Angeles, California? I can't even imagine somebody walking around the streets in a cowboy hat in Los Angeles.
Well, it was a little different then, because I went to the same areas, because I had a horse running at Hollywood Park, mm-hmm. and just in the period of time. And we used to go to, I had Bill Martinelli's parents had a home on the beach back of the airport, and we'd go down there. So I had some idea of what Los Angeles, but in the time from 1962 till the last time I was there, it was unrecognizable, because you could walk the streets freely. Everything had bars on the windows, and you couldn't park your truck, and mm-hmm. and it had been a huge change since I'd been there in the 60s.
Of course, the 60s, that was like the best thing you could be was Cowboy back then.
Yeah.
You had just every major celebrity played a role in Western movies. I don't know if we've seen like a renaissance of that until now with like this Yellowstone craze and all that. But I mean, back then, I think most people probably would rather have been a cowboy than whatever it is that they want to be now in Los Angeles. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and there used to be a lot of, like Gunsmoke and those stars on those Western, they all would, they would be the entertainers and the stars at the halftime during rodeos back in the 60s.
Really? Yeah, that's unbelievable. So Los Angeles, moved to Oklahoma City, and then you started winning gold buckles.
Well, I kind of had a step because I went through college first, and I won 3 national championships in college. And then I attended college. It was a little different because your travel and everything. And then at that time you had the draft and everything, so you didn't know from day to day if you're going to be able to rodeo tomorrow because of the draft. And so but I went through college and won national championships, and that was great for my career at that time because I got the recognition I wanted. The other thing that was great for my career at that time, that's when Benny Reynolds was on Name That Tune, and I always knew you, and he had been a friend of mine, that family forever, and he kind of let me travel with him for the first year or so. So it was an advantage at that time because you kind of had to pay an apprenticeship. It's a lot different now because you're judging stuff from there, but you had to pay an apprenticeship in order to win or be just outstanding. And that was a big benefit to me at that time to be able to get the exposure I did with Benny.
What was the cowboy culture like back then? I mean,
here's what. See, I didn't drink or smoke, and I had a college education, and they were trying to change the image of rodeo. And before I won national championships, because and at that time none of the cowboys. Now you can't get them to quit talking, but at that time none of the cowboys wanted to do any television or mainly radio, and meeting with the press and so on. And because I had some background in that, I got used way more than I normally would have got the exposure. And because of that, I got, and sponsorships weren't what they were today, but I got exposed to a lot of sponsors and so on. But there were some great things happening, and I learned a lot about the rodeo business from people like Lex Conley, Cotton Rosser, Tommy Steiner, just doing personal appearances to promote the rodeo that they were putting on at that time.
Yeah, so I mean, because you saw things that you don't necessarily see now, like you would see a cowboy on Life magazine or something like that. Yeah. The mainstream entertainment world doesn't even really recognize that we have this whole culture. For obvious reasons.
That was the biggest thing that happened to me. When I was winning my first world championship, Life magazine interviewed me and had a feature article in Life magazine, which was a huge thing for me and rodeo. But the sport themselves. The Cowboys themselves at that time really just was there to have a good time. They didn't plan. They didn't plan their future, and I was one of the first that. Now, not that other events, especially in the riding events, but they planned on whatever they won. Spending most of it entertaining themselves.
Yeah. Let me ask you this, because it sounds like at the time, like, the whole scene's kind of different than what it is now. I mean, everybody's dreaming of being a professional rodeo cowboy and setting their whole lives up just to even get to that point. But it sounds like you were one of the first guys who actually decided to do it that way. Did you have a lot of people upset with you because you were coming in and taking it so seriously and doing these professional appearances, and the guys who just wanted to kind of kick back, have fun, drink, smoke, fight, do the things that people used to do back in those days? Did they have an issue with you because you did take it so seriously?
Well, there was a certain amount. When I say issue, I got along real good because I come out of a family, even though I didn't drink or smoke myself, so I knew how to get along with people that entertained themselves well, and so I knew how to get along. On the other hand, there was a lot. They didn't like to see me in a pair of Bermuda shorts and doing exercises and so on, because a lot of them, most exercise they did was a big draw and a lucky strike just before they got on, and a short knee bend, and so there was a certain amount of that. But I always got along well. And I never had any, but there was the change and It was in a changing time, but also I wasn't. I always try to help them financially in different things, but I got along well. But there was a change, and there was some different animosities over that. Yeah,
Sure, I can imagine. I mean, you're very well spoken. You take things very seriously. Having an education in the arena at that time probably wasn't something anybody really cared about, and you did have all that. So let me ask you what it was like in 1965 for a rodeo cowboy like yourself to win a gold buckle. What comes along in those times with having a gold buckle?
Well, of course, in my case, that was the only thing I ever met. That was my ultimate goal.
Right.
I got a good education, though, in that time. And then in 1965, I set a all-time money-winning record that lasted for 10 years. But the situation was, it was my big shock was, I thought the world would stop once I won that world championship. Well, I found out that they're looking at the guy that's in the lead for next year. The public and the fan base, they're looking at the champion. So I had to revamp and start over. And I had an accident in '66, and I didn't get to rodeo till the middle of the year. And then I started back over, and I won 2 more world championships. But the big shock I got, that the world didn't stop, and if you didn't keep continuing to get better and setting goals, you were just going to stop with the
Be forgotten.
Yeah,
It's not like being the heavyweight champion of the world, right, where you carry that belt around.
Right.
The problem is the rodeo season just keeps going. In fact, it starts before you even get that gold buckle for the previous year. So it is an interesting dichotomy if you look at it that way. So you did all that, and then, of course, you had a pretty infamous injury that more or less changed your entire approach to rodeo and your life, obviously, as it would anybody's.
Well, in 1969, I'd actually had won more money than I'd ever won at that time, and I had a bareback horse. I rode bareback horses some, and I had a bareback horse flip over backwards with me and break my back very seriously. And at that time, they told me, first they didn't think I was going to walk. Then they said I'd never be able to ride a saddle horse again, and changed my whole career. For some reason, I didn't think that. I kind of thought I was indestructible, and I was in a body cast for, I guess, about 6 months from my chest down past my knees, and when I got out of the body cast and that. They didn't have the therapy in that you do now, and they didn't have the technology with their operations and so on. And they fused my back a inch out of place. They never did put it back in place, and they fused it there. And of course, I'd say it limited my athletic ability by 60%. But after I finished that, I was invited to take a publicity tour. They took a rodeo to Europe. And a guy by the name of Alan Jacobs was the one that created it and raised all the money and the financing for it. And they had Buster Ivory organize it. And by accident, they asked me if I'd go on a publicity tour with Miss Rodeo America and 2 Sioux Indians. And we toured Europe, going to the major cities and meeting with the mayors and different things. And then consequently, when I come back, they asked me if I'd go and work in the management of that rodeo. And so I spent three months in Europe. And when I come back off of that, and actually, there's some good things developed out of that, because once it was based by the stock market, which crashed at that time, there was, so when they folded over there, me and Alan Jacob went to all the armed force bases and met with the generals and actually put a rodeo circuit together and left the majority of that stock there. And that circuit ended up having about 800 members that lasted at least 30 some years.
Wow.
And they ended up with about 800 members of soldiers and Europeans. It was different than the rodeo that we see here, but it was still quite a addition to the opportunity to expose rodeo.
Yeah, and I got to imagine going to Europe in those times, I mean, taking the cowboy and the rodeo away to them. I mean, that's like at that time, the most American thing you could do. I don't really know what the most American thing you could do now is. I still think it's cowboying, but most people probably don't. But I just have to imagine what that would be like. You probably look like somebody with antennas on your head when you went over there.
Well, kind of. And then when I come back, Jacobs, he was kind of eccentric, but I had to meet with all the Western governors. And then also, instead of hiring professional Indians, Native Americans, he wanted all Sioux from the Sioux reservation. And so I had to fly to because I think I went to 5 different tribes, and they'd have powwows, and I'd choose the dancers and the singers, and then we all met. I took 16 Sioux Indians to Europe to display the Native American culture with that rodeo.
Wow. Yeah, what an interesting thing. You would love to see just like, there might be one, but just some documentary of all this stuff on how they transitioned rodeo throughout the years. Maybe they'll make one at some point. I'm sure there's footage out there. But the interesting thing is you've kind of seen it all. And it kind of transitions us to our next point, right? So you were rodeoing, you had this injury, you continued to rodeo. I think, what did you make the national finals with your injury or post-injury, another 4 or 5 times?
5 times,
yeah.
What happened is, and that's where Jim Shoulders comes back into the picture, I didn't get along very, I'd exercised and really worked hard to see if I could get my physical abilities back. And when I come back, Jim Shoulders, as a courtesy, asked me if I'd teach the bronc riding at his rodeo school. And this was about a year after the injury. And so he had a horse called, and I think it was Royal Blue is this horse's name, but he was about as perfect as any horse to ride there was. And the 2 days before the rodeo school was over, he said, would you like to get on a bronc? And I said, I don't know. He said, well, what about Colonel Blue? And I said, well, I'll try. And I got on, I had my saddle there, and I got on Colonel Blue, and probably made the worst ride I ever made in my life, and made him look about as bad, that horse, as you possibly could, but it didn't hurt. The next day I got on him and rode him right, and entered Gladewater, and I won the first 2 rounds at Gladewater. The situation was with the fused back and everything. I never could ride at the same level I could.
Didn't have the same mobility.
No, I didn't have the same deal, and I done very well, but it wasn't nothing like before.
What did that injury do? I mean, because people get injured and sometimes they don't come back. But I mean, how was it that you kind of kept yourself from falling into like a deep depression and just kind of rolling over on your back, for lack of a better term, and just not going for it again?
For some reason, I was very positive throughout with what they told me, and I just never thought that I would never not be able to do what I'd done in the past. In fact, I thought I'd be riding at the national finals that year. I didn't. I judged it, but then it took me, another year to come back to what they said I'd never come back to. But it was a real challenge because you'd done this all on your own. But I never did think that I couldn't do it. And consequently, I guess because of believing that I couldn't do it, I come back as well as I did.
Man, I wish we had 2 hours, not 1, because this is just great stuff, and I think people are going to get so much out of it. Let's fast forward to the political stuff. You getting to be kind of a humongous, if not one of the largest decision makers when it comes to the National Finals Rodeo, and the history that we all get to look back on, and then the world that we get to participate in and witness. You are one of the key figures, if not the key figure, and you're very humble, so you probably wouldn't accept that. But facts are facts. Just briefly talk about kind of how you transitioned into these political roles and became one of the biggest ambassadors and decision makers for the sport of rodeo.
I guess politics in anything was something that I'd have no interest in, basically, because basically as a contestant I was popular. You get into politics, yes, not the most popular thing, especially when you make
exact opposite, right?
Yeah, especially when you make decisions. And I thought again that the National Finals Rodeo was the key to the success of the rodeo business. And I always there were some great people that I listened to, like I already mentioned, the Steiners, the Conleys, the Rossers, and so on, that had foresight. The Harry Volds had foresight in the rodeo business. So I listened to their conversations because I wanted to learn why things. And I made up my mind. And then Dale Smith was the president of the Professional Rodeo Cowboys for several years, and he had different, more conservative ideas than I thought it would take, and to promote the sport. And so they asked me if I'd run for president. Well, I'd been college rodeo president, but I surely didn't want to be president. And so anyhow, they talked me into running. I won the election, and at that time, when I took over, I was I was president for a couple of years, and then I had a call from Harry Wald in Las Vegas. I was at the racetrack. I always had a hobby of racehorses, and I was at the racetrack. My secretary called me and said, Harry Wald from Caesar's Palace called me. Wants you to call him back. He wants to talk about the National Finals Rodeo. So I called him from a payphone. That's all he had. And he asked me if I'd be interested in moving the rodeo. That's when I was elected president, to Las Vegas. And I said, well, Oklahoma City's done a great job, but, it'd take a lot of money to get us to even consider it. So at the meantime, because of not having the experience level to deal with that kind of a business situation, I called Benny Binion, who had been a friend of mine in Las Vegas for years, and asked him about Harry. He said Harry was a guy we could depend on. And I asked him, well, would you meet with me and Harry Wald? And at that time, that's where it started. We was 2 years in the conversation. Las Vegas put together a proposal, brought it to Oklahoma City. We also gave Oklahoma City the same opportunity to come back. We met after the National Finals Rodeo in, I believe it was 84. We had a meeting in Las Vegas where the either side, we didn't have cell phones at that time, so we had a sealed room and nobody could get out or call out on the phone. At that time, both cities come in and made a proposal. Then they come back in and made a second proposal where everybody had the chance to clarify any questions and so on. And Las Vegas, actually, the vote went to Oklahoma City the first time, and it came to a tied vote the second time, which I voted to move it to Las Vegas, because at that time Las Vegas needed us as bad or worse, and I thought that if we were going to promote the sport, we had to go somewhere where we could get the exposure. Yeah, absolutely. I have to imagine that phone call or meeting with Oklahoma City was probably, you made sure that you had a getaway car, I'm sure, right? Yeah. And then, like, stay at the back door, boys. I'm going to tell them, and they're going to come for me. I'll tell you who reminds me of that. Mahan was the vice president at that time, Larry Mahan, and he reminds me of that occasionally. I believe it was he and I that went and give the bet with the two cities and told them who won the vote. So. Yeah. If you think back to that, I mean, it was absolutely the best decision. I bet everybody in this room would agree, because I just couldn't imagine the National Finals Rodeo being in Oklahoma City right now. They don't have if it continued to grow, it would be their main revenue source for the year, but it just is not the destination that Vegas is, especially now. No, and it was, but again, it was a grassroots presentation they made. That the people of Oklahoma, Clem McSpadden and them done a good job, because Clem was, a senator and did run for governor at the time, had good political connections. And the city themselves built the rodeo. The production had gone really bad. It was running 3.5 hours or better, and the people were they were there, but they weren't there when it was over, and but they made the rodeo work. But then we took it to Las Vegas. We had to dress it up to meet the kind of, the expectations of Las Vegas and the city of Las Vegas, which we put it in a 2-hour time frame. And we put a lot of things into rodeo that had never been seen before, which is carried on over into the other events. But but that time, we were when we come to the city and filled up the rooms, because at that time some of the hotels actually shut down part of their casino activity in the month of December, and we filled that void. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
just from following the history of it in Vegas, I know it struggled for a couple of years, and then something clicked, and ever since then, it's been a sold-out
That was one of my
event.
biggest days is when we sold that out. I think it was the third year we sold it out, and it's been sold out ever since. And according to what records, it's the only event that's sold out that many times in the city of Las Vegas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of their biggest revenue sources of the year, which is amazing because Cowboys do that. And it's just such an amazing event, and how intimate it is at Thomas and Mack. And you felt that when they had it in Arlington in a massive place like that. It's just not the same. You need that intimacy for that event, and I think what you guys accomplished getting it there, I mean, we'll always be forever grateful as a culture. Guys, listen up. Little Buster Toys offers the absolute best ranch, rodeo, and livestock toys, bar none. With ultra heavy-duty metal equipment, lifelike plastic, and ultra plush animals, these toys are durable enough to last through generations of playtime. Remember the toys you inherited from your grandparents? Well, do that for your kids and their kids, and so on. Bring the rodeo home and give your little buckaroo everything they need to set up their very own ranch. To find a dealer near you or purchase online, visit littlebustertoys.com. Again, that is littlebustertoys.com. Oh, and don't forget to use the discount code GAUGE at checkout for a nice 10% discount off your order. Little Buster Toys are durable, collectible, and downright cool. Visit littlebustertoys.com today. You know, it's interesting that we don't have more time because there's so much more that I think you could share with everybody. And I think we have to transition over to Zane here, but they created extra Cowboy Hall of Fames just to put you in, and we're all grateful for what you've done, and I know you stepped down recently, but what an amazing career, and I'm sure it was really great for you growing up, getting to witness all of this, and it kind of gives you a benchmark maybe for what you wanted to do. I won't speak for you, you're going to tell us, but we're all grateful for what you did, because things like this exist because of that, and so many others. So I'm sure if we took a poll from everybody involved in the rodeo world from here to here, they'd all give you a thumbs up. So thank you for your amazing career and everything you've contributed to the sport we all love and thrive in. Zane, which brings me to you, which is so interesting because you're not rodeoing. You do something totally different. And I can't wait to hear kind of what it was like for you as a child, just to kind of give a Cliff Notes version of growing up in that, and then to get into the mindset of why you shifted into a totally different industry.
Yeah, well, that part's easy to answer. Yeah. When that's growing up, that's all I knew. So I just gravitated toward it when I was younger, and I did pretty well, and I was lucky enough to win a national high school championship and 3 national college championships. But when I tried to rodeo professionally, it takes a certain mindset to do that, and not only a mindset but a skill set. And I learned quickly that I didn't like to be on the road. I'm a lot more reserved than he is, and I'm also an introvert, and I don't like to travel with people. And so that the whole rodeo aspect at a professional level didn't appeal to me. I was in college, it was fine. We went to some college rodeos. We ended up at a college finals, and then you start over again. And I think I also was starting to realize in the back of my mind that I didn't have the physical or mental ability to pursue that, because if you're going to do that, and I didn't probably realize this until I was much older, you have to have a special mindset that I did not have and was not going to develop. And if I had the physical skills, it didn't matter if you didn't have the mind skills. And so finally I got hurt here in Fort Worth, and when I woke up in the hospital, I just said, this is not what I need to be doing. The problem is, of course, I'd been to college and I had a degree, but I didn't want a job. And I wasn't lazy, I just didn't want a job that I had to go work in 9 to 5, and everything I'd focused on since I was 3 years old was now gone, And so you have to kind of reinvent yourself at that point, which I hope nobody ever has to go through. But if they do, it's a hard thing when you focused on something for 20 some years, and then you wake up one day in the hospital and decide you're not going to do that anymore. And so I didn't know what I was going to do. And my wife had a good job, so I helped him with his production for several years, and I kept myself busy. It wasn't like I was a bum, but I kept thinking I've got to do something. And again, I wasn't going to go get a job. And I got some very good job offers. Procom at the time offered me a really good job with Pro Rodeo, and I thought it over. I had some different companies try to hire me for the rodeo production, and I just, at that point, I was kind of embarrassed to be involved with rodeo, and so I didn't take any of these jobs, and I'm glad I didn't. Although they were very good jobs and nice offers, I just didn't want to be involved anymore, and so. And I'll try to make this as quick as I can because it's kind of a long story. I told my wife one day, I said, I got to do something. I can't be a bum my whole life. And she said, well, why don't you start some colts? Well, okay. But, and I'd grown up riding horses. I could ride, and I probably knew more than the average horse person going down the street, but I didn't know really how to run a horse business or even train a business. We started race colts as a kid. But that was about the extent of it. So I said, well, okay. And I put an ad in the paper, said I was a horse trainer, and basically opened up for business. And I had a Ray Hunt tape that my mother-in-law had given me, and I watched it 30, 40 times. And on the tape, he was pretty tough, and on the tape, he just roped these buggers and saddled them and got on them. Well, I thought that's how you did it. So people would drop off these horses, and I only charged $300 a month, so I got the worst kind of horses you could get. And I just did it just like Ray Hunt did on that tape. And it was a pretty good show because the neighbors would come watch me every time I got a new horse, And I kind of started a little business, and I didn't really know what I was doing yet, but I rode these horses enough that everybody was really happy that when they got them back, they thought, well, these things are really broke. So, and I remember for the first time in my life, I'd wake up in the morning and I was just really excited about something. And I didn't know where it was going or what, but I was just, this whole horse training thing, I would take horses for free. I probably had half of the horses out there for free just because I wanted to practice. And we didn't have as many. This was probably 2000, 2001, and we didn't have as many, much access to video or like online training or anything didn't exist.
The internet was different.
It was different, and you had to go down to the Western store if you wanted video and rent one, and there wasn't a lot of information out there. So I read every book I could find and watched every video, and I think probably my biggest break was when as I was reading. He had a book on his desk at the NFR. That was Monty Roberts' book, The Man Who Listens to Horses. And I never heard of this guy. And I started reading it, and I got about halfway through it, and I went and asked him if he knew this guy, because the guy had written an inscription in the front of the book to him. Mm-hmm. And he said, yeah, he trained racehorses. And I said, well, it's in the inscription, it said for him to get him some help. And I said, well, what kind of help does he need? And so he called. At that time, Monty was extremely busy and touring all over the world, and he couldn't talk to Monty, but he talked to his son Marty, and said, hey, I got somebody that's interested in working for you. Well, Monty thought I was 5'7" like him and looked like a bronc rider. Well, I showed up and I was 6 foot tall because he wanted somebody to ride that jockey saddle. He'd do the groundwork, and then he'd put the jockey on to ride at these demonstrations that Monty was doing. Mm-hmm. And I showed up, and the first thing Monty said when he looked at me, he said, how big is your mother? Because I'm 6 foot tall, and I only weighed about 168 pounds. So he used me, and we went all over the world together, and he introduced me to aspects of the horse world that I did not know existed, with the dressage and the eventing and the jumping horses and some more race horses. And anyway, so that was a good start for me. I became his tour manager, and we went all over the world for about a year and a half. And Monty had a lot of pictures of him showing back in the 60s these stock horses. And I asked him, what are these things? And he kind of explained it to me. But he didn't do any work with me on what we call reining cow horses now, but they were called stock horses back in the 60s. And that was my first introduction to it. And by this time, I'm like 28 years old. And I kind of started a little colt starting business. I'd ride anything. I worked for the BLM, and they'd run in a horse and sell tickets to watch me get on a Mustang in 2 hours, which is not an easy thing. If you've never done it, I had to halter brake it, saddle it, and get on it in 2 hours. And they'd sell tickets, and I'd get on anything. And so people got it, it's kind of like going to the circus, to watch me get on these Mustangs. And so that's how I kind of got my start. And I spent... I don't know, I had this little horse training business for 5 or 6 years, and I thought, boy, there's got to be something more to it than this. And so again, I'm trying to give you the cliff notes of it because I didn't know where I was going with it. I knew I had to advance other than this colt starting thing, and I'd seen these reigned cow horse shows, and I thought, maybe I could do that. I'd seen them on TV. I'd never seen one live, and I'm 30 years old by this point, and am I getting ahead? I'm doing all right so far.
Oh, you're doing amazing.
I'm talking too much. Anyway.
Well, this whole thing is about talking.
Okay.
So,
all right.
And I'm finding I have a lot more in common with you than I do your dad.
Okay,
so.
Good. Well, anyway, so kind of what happened, I didn't really have a facility or anything. I was living on a friend's ranch at the time, my wife and I, and I'd built myself an arena out of recycled poles and posts, and we even used recycled nails because they had some fence they tore down, and I just made an arena out of it and a round pen, and I didn't have a drag for my arena. It was just full of sagebrush and badger holes. And we managed to road it enough. We got the sagebrush to die, and we filled in the badger holes, and that's what I trained in. And I had my colt starting business there. Anyway, and I worked for Monty at the same time. I'd go on the tour with him half a month, and I'd be home half a month, riding whatever people would send me. And I was in Gainesville, Florida, with Monty at a show he was doing there, and a lady came up to me. She was a ranch manager for a guy named Sandy Semenuk, who also had a rodeo company in Florida. And we'd done some production work for him for his rodeo. So his manager knew me through the rodeo connection. And she comes up and she said, "We have this stud nobody can ride. We've sent him to several trainers, and he bucks everybody off. Would Monty be interested in working with him?" And I told her, I said, "Look, Monty's got to be in Germany next week." I said, "You're not going to get him." Because his book at the time had been on the bestseller list 53 weeks. He had appointments all over the world. And she said, "Well, would you be interested in coming when the tour's over?" I said, "Sure." Nobody ever asked me to do something like that. So I said, "Yeah, I'd do it." And I got a call from Mr. Semenuk's office the next week from his secretary saying, "Since you're coming, he's got 70 others you can ride." So I started going to Florida in the winters. We had a pretty good relationship. I went down the first year, and we sold a lot of his horses, and he'd taken a lot of his Western pleasure bred horses and crossed them with his rodeo horses because his rodeo string had a lot of color, and he wanted some colored looking Western pleasure horses. And what they didn't consider was what you had was a very colored Bronc at that point, and nobody'd ride them but me. But anyway, I get them broke enough that he could kind of sell them. And after about, I think it was my third or fourth year there, he says, "I don't think I have very good horses." I said, "Well, you probably don't." And he said, "Well, where do we go get some good ones?" I said, "I don't know, but wherever we go has got to be better than what you got." And so we went to the Triangle Sale in Oklahoma, in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And we bought a horse called Bobby Starlight. He just turned 2, and he was unstarted. He was a son of Grace Starlight, and he was, a magnificent looking thing. And Sandy bought him and a couple others. And he said, "Well, what are we going to do with this horse?" I said, "Well, I guess we better show him a horse like that." And he said, "Well, what are we going to show him in?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I saw one of those cow horse shows one time." I said, "I think I can do that." And he said, "Well, okay, well, I'll finance you and you don't do it." Well, you got to realize, I didn't know at the time, you don't just go do this. Most of the guys I compete against, they apprentice for years, and by this time I'm like 32 or 3 years old, and I'm a rookie and don't know what I'm doing except for the videotapes that I started to rent and buy, and I taught myself how to do it a little bit, and I didn't have the facility for it. I had a little indoor arena. We'd moved and bought a place at this point, and I had a little indoor arena, but you got to practice running and stopping and that kind of stuff, and I didn't have ground for that, and the ground in my indoor arena was pretty good, so I'd open the door on each end because it was just a short run, and I put a panel out in the driveway outside the arena on one end and out in the pasture outside the other door, and I'd run through the arena to practice my stops. And if my horse was running pretty good, because you have to get horses running good to get them to stop, and if I felt like it was running pretty good, I'd say whoa because I was running through the arena, because that's where the ground was good. And then if not, I'd just run out into the driveway, out through the door. And anyway, we did a lot of things like that because I didn't have the facilities, I didn't really have the knowledge. But this Bobby Starlight was so good, he made up for all my weaknesses. And I went and showed him, and I had a couple others, like I said, and I won so much on him, it put me on what they call the open rider list in the NRCHA, which is the top 30 riders in the world. Well, I had no business being on it. That horse was just so good that I won enough to get on it. Well, then I got whipped bad the next year because you can only compete against other open riders. You can't be an intermediate and limited and all those kind of things. I think that was the best thing that happened to me because I thought if I'm going to be on this list, then I got to figure out what I'm doing. And then I started asking for help and trying to figure things out. And anyway, that's how I got started in the cow horse thing and how the horse training thing all came about. I think it mostly came about out of not knowing what to do with myself. And then when I started it, I thought, I've never liked anything this much in my life. And it drove my wife crazy because I rode all these horses for free all the time. She said, you got to charge people for this kind of thing. Anyway, that's kind of how we got started.
It's really interesting, right? Because it's kind of a gift and a curse when you have a parent who achieves absolute greatness. And what it does to a son is I think it creates a kind of a conflict inside of you, right? I'm sure it did that for you because you don't know what path to go on. And when you have a father or a mother or whatever who creates this giant shadow, not because they were trying to, just because they were being the best them they could, you got to run really hard to get out from under that shadow. And it sounds like that's what you had to figure out.
At first it didn't, I never considered it. I think when he got into the politics, that's what was hard on me. I didn't like, we had landlines then and I was a kid and you had to answer the phone. And all them people from the PRCA were mad all the time, and he wasn't there, and I'd have to take a message. And I mean, I just got where I absolutely hated politics. And I think it was more, to this day, I don't get involved with any kind of political thing in our association at all. I think the shadow never bothered me at all. You would think if it did, it was subconsciously. Sure. It wasn't ever on a conscious level. The politics bothered me a lot. And I think that was more the reason that I wanted to get away from rodeo than anything was because of the politics. But that was a necessary part of what he had to do. I didn't think about it too much as much as you'd think, at least on a conscious level. But what was good about it was the fact that if you're around someone successful, then you try to be successful yourself. I had to change venues to do so. But I think it was probably more of a blessing than a curse, if anything, sure.
Yeah, well, and so that kind of prompts the next little phase of what I wanted to talk to you about, because if you look at you like as someone who is a absolute amazing trainer of performance horses, and it's very quick to see just from a quick glance. Let's say you don't know anything about you at all you got to do is look at your Facebook page and realize, wow, this guy's really deep, he's really philosophical, and he's a thinker. And that transitions sometimes into amazing horsemanship. And that's exactly what it did for you. And I think that's why people like you so much is you're not your quintessential character in that world. Obviously, look at your start. You're probably the only guy who reinvents himself at the age of 30 and becomes a $2 million earner. I mean, that's just not something that really you can pull. You certainly couldn't pull it off in rodeo. You wouldn't be able to start being a great saddle bronc rider at the age of 33. Your prime is already behind you. But you figured out a way to reinvent yourself at an age where in any type of sport, like that's your prime, you peak, and you're peaking, and you're doing these things now, which is so unique. But what is that kind of mindset that you've got and your whole philosophical approach, not just to horse training, but life? Because I think that might be the most valuable thing somebody could get from you is just the fact that you're so deep, which is the really kind of heartbreaking part of this is we don't have a ton of time, but I think it's really key. That's the value I think you bring outside of your fantastic horsemanship and all that is I think you have an amazing mind, and you can look at that just by some of the stuff you write on your own Facebook page. Oh,
thank you. I think I probably from lack of maturity, I never thought of age much. I think it might be genetic because none of us think we're old for some reason. I think that's common for everybody, but both sides of my family never seems to get old. So at 33, I didn't realize that was an old age to be doing what I was doing. Most of the people I compete against, have won $1 million by the time they're the good ones. They've been doing this since they were 18 years old. I just didn't know that 33 was old for starting what I was doing. But my whole training deal is, I think, much different than my closest competitors. I mean, I don't take a lot of horses. I don't have 50 horses in the barn. I mean, we have 20. That's it. And we concentrate on those 20. And when you take those kind of numbers, nowadays, you limit yourself a great deal because you don't have a pool to pick from to be at the top of your game. But that's the way I've chosen, because I like to take the 20 and just concentrate on them. Where if I've got 50, I personally can't manage that many, and I like to be in control. And so we spend a lot of time with them. I've been fortunate that my horses, even after my owners are done with them and we sell them to somebody else, have gone on and win into their old age. I think I had 4 in the World's Greatest Horseman that I'd done, all the early training on this year, and have had up to 7 in the contests like that. Also, I noticed last night, just listening to the speaker, there were 2 or 3 in the youth World's Greatest Horseman that did the same thing. And so that's kind of always been my focus, because the money and the fancy trailers and that kind of stuff has never been what it was about for me. I think maybe when I first started, I was overcome by it all. I thought, man, that's what I want. And a lot of guys do, and that's fine. I didn't grow up in an apprenticeship type program where you see the guy you're working under with all his fancy stuff. I grew up, on this ranch, or I started in this ranch in Montana with a recycled arena. And so just having a trailer was a bonus for me, but I never aspired to be the guy that was on the road with the fancy trucks and the trailers and that. And if you do, that's fine. I just wanted to see, like last night, we had probably to illustrate my point, we had probably the toughest field of finalists in the World's Greatest Horseman I've ever seen. They were unbelievably tough, and just any horse in there could have won it on a given night. And the horse that I rode, we were going to retire him last night, and I thought, all I want to do is for him to have a perfect performance, because there's so many variables in our sport. I mean, there's the guy that's got the best horse rarely wins it, quite honestly. So your goal should always be to make them the best they can be, and that's always been our goal. And like last night, I ended up 3rd in the finals, which was quite an accomplishment. Nobody cares who the 3rd World's Greatest Horseman is, but I thought, if I can just get him through his last time and he not make a mistake, that's a huge win in this event. And he did. I made a mistake. I roped one to the steer too deep, and we drew a bad cat on the fence, neither of which were his fault. He had a perfect performance. And so he got to go out, in my opinion, on top. And that's what, when you talk about thinking deep and stuff, that's always been my goal, is to make them reach their potential. Whether they're a champion or not, we get them as good as they can. And that's all we can ask for in this. And that's kind of been our training approach in my program.
Yeah, well, and I think that kind of adds a purity to it, because if you're a horseman of any kind, right, it's always about the horse. It's not about the flashy stuff. It's not even about you. And you just beautifully said that exact thing. You could have just said it's about the horse, and it would have been the same thing that you just said. But sure. What if you were to create, like, let's say a phrase that's etched in stone, we put it on the side of a building, it's there forever as like a memorial. What would you say that these horses mean to you? Like that horse you retired last night. I mean, I had seen where you really credit that horse a lot. And yeah. I mean, you wrote this thing and she sent it to me, but it was just like, wow. True horsemen never say I, they always say they. And that's how you're talking to somebody of character that you can get just something truly valuable from. So what would that phrase be, right? If you're going to sum it all up, even if it's about that horse or all those horses, I mean, you're looking at this body of work, that this humble beginning, which is so hard to do in that world that you're in. Yeah. You almost can't have it, but you did. And so what would that be? What would that phrase be? If you could say anything, what would it be? I
don't know if I can come up with a phrase without having, hours to think about it. So I'll just kind of sum it up.
It's not fair that I put you on the spot like that.
Well, some people are good at speaking spontaneously. I'm not. I have to plan a long time in advance. I think, and this, I don't know if this is going to answer your question. As you get older, you start to think about things differently. And I've always wondered what makes people do the things they do and how they gravitate to people they hang out with, jobs they enjoy, sports they enjoy, recreation they enjoy, person they marry. For me, like I said, I'm kind of an introvert, and I always was, but as a teenager and stuff, you can't get a date if you're an introvert, so you try to not be one. But I always seem to gravitate this personally toward animals, and so for some reason I could relate to them. It was easier for me, and so for me, I've always really liked them. So to answer your question the best I can, it's just been easy for me to do that because I don't like going anywhere. I actually go out to the barn every day, and I don't want to leave. I hate to show. I mean, you have to drag me here. I mean, if I got a horse that's hard to get in the trailer, he's not as hard to get in the truck as I am. He's easier to get him in the trailer than it is me in the truck, because competition's not something I enjoy. But anyway, it's always been I really like working with their mind and seeing what I can develop out of it. And I think the challenge of that and to see them progress, almost like your kid, you can see them progress and get better and do things. And there's a lot of joy in being able to see them develop. And I wrote this. I don't write very much. We're kind of giving the impression I write a lot, but on the Facebook thing, occasionally I'll write something. And I wrote something 6 months ago that I started thinking about it on the way home from a show that I had to go to, and I thought, well, why do I really do this? And this might be the answer to your question. Because if, as humans, we're giving stewardship over, God's creatures, so to speak. So if I can make that horse reach his potential, I've pretty much assured him a good life. I mean, not only is he monetarily valuable, but he's going to be sentimentally valuable to someone as well after he leaves me. And they're going to take good care of that thing his whole life. And so if I do my job well, then I've done him a favor. He's going to be completely taken care of his whole life. And I think that's I guess if I was going to etch it in stone, I don't have it down to a sentence yet, but that's kind of probably the way to answer your question.
I think that's a perfect answer. Well, gentlemen, we just hit our time, but you guys are scholars and fantastic people, and we are so lucky that we get to have this little interaction etched in time. And I think a lot of people are going to get something out of your journey and yours. And we're grateful that everybody was able to get their butts out of bed to be here. You guys are on cowboy time, but I'll tell you, he certainly is not.
He looks like a cowboy.
He does, doesn't he? Yeah, it's because he's been hanging around here for a couple of years. Well, we appreciate it, and congratulations on retiring your great horse.
Thank you.
Last night, and how well you did, and congratulations on your amazing body of work that we all benefit from in the rodeo world. You guys are fantastic, and what a great family that we could all look up to. So
thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Good to be here.
Yes, sir. We'll let you guys hit the road.
Okay.
This has been The Gauge, hosted by me, Chance Conrado, produced and edited by our guy Ty Yeager. Shout out to the executive producers Dustin Pointer and Cody Denton. Marketing and content produced by Riley Chone. Make sure to rate and review this podcast, as well as follow The Gauge on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And make sure to subscribe to The Gauge wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you guys next time.